imprisonment with a recommendation that he should not be released for at least 30 years, said it was difficult to find words adequate to describe the brutality and gravity of the offences. Outside the court, crowds waited at the end of the 3-week hearing. Mrs. Beryl Leach, whose daughter Barbara was killed by Sutcliffe, said the case had created bonds between all those parents and relatives who had attended the court. With the relatives was Olive Smelt, a survivor of one of the Ripper's attacks. And another parent, Mrs. Doreen Hill, whose daughter Jacqueline was Sutcliffe's last victim. From the Old Bailey, this report by Jeremy Thompson.
Just before 3:30 this afternoon, the jury were recalled only to tell the judge that they could not reach a unanimous verdict. In that case, he advised them he could accept a majority decision. 50 minutes later, the 6 men and 6 women of the jury filed quietly back into court number 1. They'd been out for just under 6 hours. The clerk of the court began to read out the charges. First was the death of Wilma McCann. Do you, he asked the jury, find Peter William Sutcliffe guilty of murder or guilty of manslaughter? In a firm, clear voice, the foreman of the jury replied, "We find him guilty of murder." 10 of them had agreed, he said. 2 dissented. Sutcliffe, closely guarded by 5 prison officers, moved restlessly at the dock rail. In the press benches and public gallery above, there was a stir, but no noise. Olive Smelt, a surviving victim, and the parents of Jacqueline Hill, Barbara Leach and Jane MacDonald looked on, the strain and emotion clear on their faces. One by one, the 12 other charges were read out. Each time, the verdict was murder. Each time, the majority 10-2. Immediately, the Attorney General asked that Sutcliffe should be locked up for the rest of his life. Dr. Terence Kay, one of the psychiatrists who'd given evidence, said that in the light of Sutcliffe's illness, he agreed. The judge then turned to Sutcliffe. "Peter William Sutcliffe, the jury have found you guilty of 13 charges of murder, and if I may say so, murder of a very cowardly nature." He said he found it difficult to describe the brutality, so he would let the catalogue of crimes speak for themselves. He spoke of the deep fear that Sutcliffe had induced among women over a wide area. Sutcliffe said to the judge, "You are an unusually dangerous man, and therefore I recommend an unusually long period of imprisonment, 30 years. But in your case, I hope life will mean exactly that." He added that the 7 other counts of attempted murder would each carry a life sentence. Then the judge told Sutcliffe, "You may go." And Peter William Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, left the dock at the Old Bailey for the last time.
One of the questions causing some public concern is how Sutcliffe succeeded in avoiding capture for the 6 years during which he attacked 20 women. In that time, he was interviewed 9 times by officers investigating the murders, but police, misled by the hoax tape recording with a Geordie accent, let him go. After the verdict, West Yorkshire's Chief Constable, Mr. Ronald Gregory, said there would be an inquiry into the way the investigation had been conducted. After the verdict, Mrs. Doreen Hill, mother of the Ripper's last victim, gave us her reaction. Her daughter Jacqueline would have been 21 today.
I think the jury reached the right verdict. It was exactly what I wanted. It doesn't make me feel any happier. It doesn't bring Jacqueline back. But it was the right one as far as Sutcliffe was concerned.
Are you satisfied with the sentence that he's received?
Well, I would have preferred him to stay in prison for the rest of his life, his natural life.
And if there'd still been capital punishment, would you have hoped that he would have been hung?
I would have, but many people have said they thought hanging was far too good for him.
Would you share that view?
I'd be quite happy to have him hung.
On BBC1 at 9:25 there will be a special programme on the background to the Yorkshire Ripper murders. In the Northern Ireland local council elections, the prominent Catholic Member of Parliament Gerry Fitt has lost his seat on Belfast City Council. Mr Fitt, who had held the seat for more than 20 years, said he had lost votes because he'd criticised the men of violence. Counting the votes is still going on, and it looks as though Ian Paisley's Democratic Unionist Party and the traditionally dominant official Unionist Party are running neck and neck. A report from Michael Burke.
For a decade, Gerry Fitt has been perhaps the most recognisable voice of moderate Catholic opinion in Northern Ireland. When the hunger strikes began, he was outspoken in his opposition and has been reviled by Republican extremists as a result. Until now, his particular brand of street politics has had an unbroken run of success as a Belfast councillor and MP. But after 23 years, he's now lost his seat on the council. According to provisional Sinn Féin, a quisling has been slapped in the face.
There are people who have been elected in this election who are not very far from the gunmen. And I think that the people themselves will learn to live with that and to recognise that in the weeks and months which lie ahead.
The election has left the Reverend Ian Paisley as arguably the most important single politician in Northern Ireland. His party, the Democratic Unionists, making huge gains.
The hunger strikes and the violence that went with them have caused the voters to evacuate the middle ground of Ulster politics. However fragmented the parties, however complicated the voting system here, the message is plain. The people have shuffled towards the extremes, and the moderates are today's political casualties in Northern Ireland.
Police confirm that a girl of 12, alleged to have been hit by a plastic bullet, has died in a Belfast hospital. The H-Block committee in Belfast claim that Carol Ann Kelly from Twinbrook was hit by a plastic bullet on Tuesday night when there was no rioting going on. The police said that the army fired a number of plastic bullets when rioters attacked a primary school, which was being used as a polling station. The annual rate of inflation has fallen again to 12%, the lowest it's been since June 1979. According to the Retail Price Index, the rate of inflation has been going down almost without a break for a year. Mr. John Silkin is expected to agree this weekend to be nominated for Labour's deputy leadership. He's been under strong pressure to become an alternative left-wing candidate in the contest between Mr. Benn and Mr. Healy. France's new socialist president, François Mitterrand, has dissolved the right-wing dominated National Assembly and called for new parliamentary elections, which should be held next month. And the Soviet president has warned that one hasty step could set off a Middle East war. Mr. Brezhnev called for an international conference on Lebanon. Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer have been to Tetbury in Gloucestershire, close to the Prince's home at Highgrove House, to open an operating theatre at the local hospital. A report from John Norman.
Hundreds of people greeted the Prince and Lady Diana as they walked through the town. It seemed that nearly everyone had flowers for the Prince's fiancée, and she was clearly delighted to accept them. The streets, just off from what will be their future shopping centre, were packed with people eager for a look at the couple. Extra flower holders were needed at the hospital, where Prince Charles was told that the new operating theatre had cost £57,000, nearly half of it given by the League of Friends. The visitors later toured the wards, and the women patients received unexpected bouquets as Lady Diana gave each of them some of the armfuls of flowers she'd been given on her walk through Tetbury.
Well, now for the main points of the news once again, this time with subtitles for the hard of hearing. In the Yorkshire Ripper trial at the Old Bailey, Peter William Sutcliffe has been found guilty on all 13 charges of murder. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment and made a recommendation that he should serve a minimum of 30 years in jail. The jury took 6 hours to decide by a majority of 10-2 to reject Sutcliffe's plea that he was guilty of manslaughter. The judge congratulated the police, who've conducted a hunt lasting 6 years for the man who became known as the Yorkshire Ripper. But at Westminster, a Labour MP has tabled a motion calling for an inquiry into policing methods in the West Yorkshire area. In the local elections in Northern Ireland, the Catholic MP, Mr. Gerry Fitt, has lost his seat on Belfast City Council. He had held the seat for more than 20 years and said he thought he had lost it because he had spoken out against the men of violence. In Londonderry, a man died after being wounded in the violence that followed the death last night of the hunger striker Patsy O'Hara. And in Belfast, a girl of 12, alleged to have been hit by a plastic bullet last Tuesday, has died in hospital. The annual rate of inflation has fallen again, this time to 12%, the lowest since June 1979. Well, that's all from us for now. Newsnight is on BBC2 at 10:45.
Well, now a look at the weather. Rain will spread from the west to most places by the end of the night to give a dull and wet start to tomorrow. Quite early in the day, however, brighter weather, although with showers, will reach southwest England, and this will spread to most other western areas during the morning and all but northeast Scotland by the end of the afternoon. And it will be generally rather cool and windy. In Newsweek this evening, Steve Bradshaw reports.
When Ronald Reagan was elected president, he promised to hold the line against communism throughout the world. Now many of his supporters believe the enemy is closer than ever, not only in Cuba, but in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Guatemala, and before long, perhaps even in America's oil-rich neighbor, Mexico, leading to fears of guerrilla war spilling over into America itself. Will the president send in American troops, or will he try to back right-wing regimes and risk the charge that America is arming some of the world's most ruthless dictators? Newsweek this week reports on the enemy at President Reagan's door.
That's tonight at 8:25. And now on to, in Impressions, a portrait of Yorkshireman George Leat, the miller.
George Leat is a Yorkshireman, a prosperous corn and seed merchant in Skipton. He has two great interests. This ancient water mill, which he bought and restored to working order, and dogs. He's a well-known judge in the dog world.
You know, but they haven't worked and put the hours in or taken the chances that I have.
This is BBC2. And now another visit to Clack's Farm for Gardener's World.
Welcome back to Clack's Farm. You know, apple blossom time's lovely anywhere, but particularly so here in the orchard at Clack's Farm. I noticed too there's a great variation in the flowering period, so it is imperative when you're choosing pollinators not only to get trees that are pollen compatible, but that flower at the same time. And
on the 14th of June, Sunday the 14th of June.
I hope the weather's good for you. Well, join us next week because it is the Year of the Disabled and next week's programme is purely gardening for the disabled. And I think there'll be something interesting for the people who are not so disabled. So join us then. These are beautiful, aren't they? Really they are. Quality plants.
Playhouse tonight is Random Moments in a May Garden by James Saunders. The similar thoughts of past and present are brought together by the taking of a photograph and its discovery 80 years later.
Anyway, I came across something in the dresser. Interesting relic. I think I left it in here. Oh, yes, here it is. An old photograph. I found it under the line paper. It must have been there for generations.
Such serious expression.
It was a serious business in those days, having your photograph taken.
I wanted to stand, not sit. I feel more graceful standing. I felt right standing there. I inclined my head a little to one side and gave a calm gaze into the absolute middle of the camera lens.
It's not as if I'm unhappy with my life. I'm not even unhappy. I just don't see the necessity for living.
My hands are folded, one on the other, as I've been taught. I'm wearing a large hat. I'm looking at the camera. This picture will last forever, but I shall die.
Zena Walker and Barry Foster star in Random Moments in a May Garden, tonight at 9:30. And now on to Newsweek presents a frank and disturbing report on the violent unrest in Central America and reaction to it in Washington. Central American dominoes.
In Central America, it's hardly news anymore if a politician like the mayor of Soyapanga is shot dead in the street. And his peace agreement with Israel. Until then, good night.
On BBC1 now, there's the 9 o'clock news, followed at 9:25 by a special programme on the Peter Sutcliffe case, the Yorkshire Ripper, Murder and Myth. Here on 2, another two teams attempt to confuse each other in Call My Bluff.
Hello again. Call My Bluff and running onto the field in the blue strip, Arthur Marshall.
In 10 minutes, Newsnight includes reports on the implications for psychiatry and the law in the light of the Ripper verdict, and the extraordinary scenes at Bob Marley's funeral in Jamaica. First on 2, a short cartoon called Pickles. On BBC1 in a minute, the news headlines, followed in 5 minutes by the World Professional Latin American Ballroom Championships. That's except for viewers to BBC Wales. Here on 2 now, Newsnight.
The doctor said he wasn't responsible for his crimes. The jury says he was. Peter William Sutcliffe gets 30 years for murder. Good evening. Amid currency problems. Well, that's all from this edition of Newsnight. We'll be back on Tuesday, 3 days off, don't forget. Have a good holiday from us all. A very good night and a very good weekend to you. Good night.
Well, Glenn Ford and Jack Lemmon are the stars of the late film on BBC1 in a couple of moments, Cowboy. A colourful, unromantic look at the hard life of the trailhand. Well, here on 2 in 25 minutes, international golf, with highlights of the first round of the Sun Alliance PGA Championship. First, Mike Hennessy introduces A World of Jazz.
If anybody has come a long way from St. Louis, it's trumpeter Clark Terry, who was born in that Missouri city 60 years ago. In 1970...
And that next programme in the World of Jazz series will be at the same time next Friday. Well, now on to International Golf, introduced by Peter Alice.
Welcome to the Sun Alliance PGA Championship from the delightful Ganton Golf Club, some 7 or 8 miles inland from the East Yorkshire town of Scarborough. Ganton. We'll be back later on today, in fact at 10:55 a.m, to bring you the second day of this year's Sun Alliance PGA Championship. I hope you've enjoyed our programme tonight, and we'll see you later on. Bye-bye.
And when play resumes in the morning, viewers with CFAX will be able to keep in touch with the latest scores and developments. And tomorrow evening, Peter Alice will be playing a round of golf and talking with England soccer captain Kevin Keegan. Well, that's at 7:10 tomorrow. We're back now to this evening for another journey to the outer limits.
The persistence of man's curiosity led him into new worlds. Without conquering his own, he invaded the subworld of the microscope and the outer world of space. It is said turnabout is fair